you're gonna make it until summer.
Everyone pities Chani. They look at her in Dune Messiah and just see a helpless concubine who was secretly given Bene Gesserit fertility suppressants. It reads like a footnote. It isn't. Before the Holy Wars, before she was a political set piece, she was the spiritual heart of her tribe. A Fremen Sayadina is trained to handle the water of life, to navigate the lethal neurotoxins of the desert, and to guide her people through the harshest environment in the known universe. The Siege didn't just respect her, it listened to her, and she is the most dangerous person in that palace. While Paul is paralyzed by his own godhood, Chani is the one demanding blood. She tells Paul to execute the conspirators. To her, it's basic Fremen survival. Water for water. But Paul doesn't listen, because he isn't fighting for survival anymore. He is fighting time itself. The mainstream narrative claims that Princess Irulan simply murdered Chani. That is factually wrong. Irulan never intended to kill her. She was acting on her own, using her Bene Gesserit training to systematically suppress Chani's fertility to force Paul into taking the princess as his actual mate. It was an act of biological extortion, using Chani's womb as a political hostage. But to a Fremen, bringing life into the brutal wastes of Arrakis is a sacred defiance. A desert pregnancy is a massive risk, a literal drain on a tribe's water. Denying a Fremen woman that right is a theft of her fundamental purpose. Chani refused to be a pawn. When she realized her body was failing, she turned to a radical, ancient Fremen fertility diet, consuming raw, concentrated melange in staggering quantities. Spice at those concentrations doesn't heal. It consumes. The old Fremen knew it. That's why the ancient methods were forbidden. Irulan's suppressants didn't directly kill Chani. The lethal reaction came from the violent collision of those chemicals and Chani's massive spice overdose. The resulting chemical fire inside her veins accelerated her pregnancy to a terrifying degree. She burned her own physical vessel to ash to bring later the Second and Ganima into the universe. Think back to the caves of Siege Tabor. Before the Jihad burned over 90 planets in a wave of devastation. Back then, they were just Paul and Chani, sharing water, finding a sliver of quiet humanity in the dark. He could still smell the ozone and crushed spice on her skin, the weight of her against him in the cold of the cave. She used to trace the scars on his knuckles with her thumb. She never asked how he got them. They didn't speak of destiny or power. They just breathed in the stillness of the cave, safe from the scouring winds of the open desert. It was a life built on small, brutal necessities, the heat of their shared bodies, the taste of recycled water, and nothing else they needed to say. Now, he's drowning in the future, entirely isolated in a palace of cold stone. Even Stilgar, once one of the most capable knives in the sand, had surrendered his judgment to the myth of Muad'Dib, utterly blind to the slow death of his own niece. It's a slow, agonizing execution playing out in plain sight over 9 months. And the truly sickening part? The Emperor watched every single second of it. Why didn't the Kwisatz Haderach stop it? The man who sees generations in advance knew about Irulan's presence from the very beginning, he could have ended the threat with a single word. But he didn't. Because Paul Atreides is a monster. Paul isn't paralyzed by evil. He's paralyzed by knowing too much. He doesn't see just one timeline. He is crushed under the weight of millions of overlapping, screaming realities. Every time he reached for a different path, the timelines showed him something worse. He was terrified of a future where she was captured and tortured by the remnants of the old empire, or the ultimate nightmare, that she would be murdered and her corpse bought by the Bene Tleilax. The Tleilaxu axolotl tanks don't just clone dead flesh, they rip a person's physical template back from the void to create a reconstructed body that can be conditioned into obedience. He lived in absolute dread that they would turn her into a Gola, programmed to assassinate him. His ego, his obsessive need to keep their love pure, couldn't handle the thought of her memory being desecrated. So, he managed her death like a demolition project, counting the days. He chose the path where she died, because every alternative future was worse. The true horror of her arc hits seconds after her last breath. Paul is blind, his eyes melted out by a stone burner. Sidetail, the face dancer, steps over the bloody sheets and offers a sickening trade. Surrender to the Empire, and the Tleilaxu will grow Chani back. It was a precise surgical strike at his broken heart. They wanted to use the breathing, synthetic flesh of his wife as a leash to drag him out of power. Paul's refusal is the final audible snap of his sanity. He orders Sidetail's execution by aiming his knife through the vision of his newborn son. Without Chani, the man who was Paul Atreides is gone. Chani didn't die because Paul was weak. She died because she refused to become a myth. And in his world, that was a death sentence.